There are a lot of reasons why a player in Overwatch esports does or doesn't perform. Sometimes the team environment can be toxic, or maybe the communication just wasn't up to par. Maybe the players on the team just aren't good enough. Whatever the reason may be, there are lots of players out there with pretty mediocre careers. However, there are a select few who are able to redeem those careers, going from a disappointment or a bench player to a bona fide superstar. Today, I'm going to go over 5 Overwatch redemption arcs during Overwatch League history. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. YouTube says that only 11% of my viewers are subscribed, so if you wouldn't mind, please consider subscribing as it would really mean a lot to me. If there's anyone that I missed, or there's any players you want me to talk about, leave a nice comment down below, and I'd love to see them. With the shilling done, let's get the video started. One player who really changed up his career trajectory for the better is Checkmate. Checkmate originally joined the Florida Mayhem in 2021, where he was mostly a bench player for Yaki. Halfway through the season, the Mayhem's tank player, OGE, stopped playing, so the Mayhem were forced to sub Checkmate in to play main tank, even though he was actually a flex DPS player. Checkmate's Reinhardt was really funny to watch, and he was clearly inexperienced on the role. He really looked like a plat player in those matches. Like, if you compared those replay files to me in my comp games, they look about the same. He would pin in like a psychopath and play just so aggressively, and he would end up dying in the process. Despite having Checkmate on main tank, the Mayhem actually went to map 5 with the Dallas Fuel with Checkmate on Reinhardt, which was honestly pretty funny. After OG returned, Checkmate would actually not play again, and he'd end up being removed from the team later in the season. This is where people probably thought his career would end, but less than a month later, the Mayhem actually re-signed him for the 2022 season. People were really surprised, considering his not-so-great performance in 2021. But most of us figured he must have performed well in trials, because he would end up being the starting flex DPS for the Mayhem in 2022. In 2022, Checkmate immediately showed why the Mayhem kept him around, being one of the best players on the Mayhem team alongside someone, and he really helped give the Mayhem a pretty good season. He really caught everyone off guard, as no one expected him to be actually pretty good. His Genji, Tracer, and Echo play were all very great, and once 2023 rolled around, the Mayhem actually kept him on the roster. He was a key component in the Mayhem's win in the Pro-Am, and in the Mid-Season Madness knockouts, Checkmate was the only reason why the Mayhem beat the Gladiators and made it to the main event. He went absolutely nuclear, and during this whole time, he was actually injured, yet in every single map, he was a lobby admin. The team would end up placing 3rd in the tournament, and they kept the momentum going into the rest of the season, not dropping a single game for the rest of the year, and ultimately winning the playoffs later that season. Checkmate went from a meme on Reinhardt to an Overwatch League champion in only 2 years, and he's widely considered to be a great player. The next player I want to talk about is someone who had to fight for playtime against several different tanks, but is able to prove himself despite his team trying to replace him at every opportunity. I'm talking about the Aussie legend, Punk. Punk joined the Overwatch League in 2020 on that awful Boston Uprising team. He joined midway through the season and made a nice impact, helping his team upset the Gladiators, and it was the only reason they won a game in the playoffs. In 2021, despite Punk showing a lot of potential, the Uprising still tried to bench him for another off-tank player, Gabolsi. Despite the split playtime, Punk still looked like one of the better components on the team, and people were really asking for him to be played more. In 2022, Gabolsi, Fusion, and Stand won left, so you would assume that now is finally Punk's chance to shine as a solo tank. But the Uprising decided to sign Marvel and Itzal, and Punk had to fight for playtime yet again. Marvel ended up leaving the team early in the year, and Punk was finally given a chance to shine, and he was a key component in the Uprising's wins. In the Jotes meta, Punk looked fantastic, upsetting the Atlanta Reign early in the stage. But the Uprising signed Mag and ended up putting Punk back on the bench. The team would really struggle and not get a single win throughout the stage until the Uprising finally got the bright idea to sub in their Western players, those being Seeker, Crimzo, and Punk, where they would finally get another win over the Titans. With the Western players back on the roster, the team would go 4-2 in the next stage, which was the best stage the Uprising had the whole season by 2 full wins. After 2022, Punk was finally freed from Uprising prison and moved over to the Vancouver Titans as the solo tank, which finally guaranteed he wouldn't be fighting for playtime anymore, and he quickly showed what a great choice that was. The Titans were actually pretty good in 2023, placing 5th in NA with an even record, as well as getting some really nice upsets throughout the season. Punk showed that teams really needed to have more faith in their players, and forcing Punk onto the bench was just clearly a terrible choice. Once he finally stopped having to fight for playtime, he was immediately elevated to a top-tier tank player. Moving over to EU, if anyone remembers the 2021 London Spitfire, you would remember just how disappointing this team was. The supposed EU super team won just a single game against the other worst team in the NA region, the Vancouver Titans. Most of these players looked really disappointing, so after an abysmal 1-15 season, most of the roster would be dropped. So when players like Kellex, Hybrid, and Hadi were removed, no one really batted an eye. However, I think everyone was surprised when the Spitfire ended up re-signing Hadi for the 2022 season. His 2021 season was very bad. He was considered a bottom 5 tank by most people. And heading into 2022, most people, myself included, rated Hadi pretty low. But he showed us pretty quickly he was not the reason why the 2021 Spitfire were bad. His Reinhardt was so unexpected and caught a lot of teams unaware. He quickly gained the nickname Chatty for his large muscles and really confident gameplay. He was a complete 180 from the previous season, where he just spent most of the season in the spawn room. The Spitfire were by no means a top team, but their Ryan Rush comp really could catch a lot of the lower teams off guard, and they finished 6th place in the NA region, and got top 6 in the playoffs as well. The Spitfire made little changes in 2023, but for some reason, they tried to move away from their Rhine comps, and they really suffered as a result, going 2-8 in the beginning of the season. However, they decided to fully invest in Hadi's Rhine comps, and suddenly they were doing a lot better, going 5-1 for the rest of the season and finishing 8th place in NA with a 7-9 score. Now that the momentum was on their side, they were able to survive the play-ins, getting an upset against the Vancouver Titans and Toronto Defiant and making it to the playoffs. They would continue to spam their Rhine comps and ended up placing 5th through 6th in the playoffs. After the Overwatch League ended, Hadi moved over to Space Station Gaming for Overwatch Championship Series, where he would end up being a top 2 tank player in EU, and he continues to dominate to this day. Hadi was able to overcome his awful 2021 season and really bounce back to becoming one of the best tanks in the world. Hadi used his second chance to really make a name for himself, and it goes to show that one bad season really doesn't define a player. Another player I want to talk about today is Edison. Edison was never a bad player, so to say, but his job as a substitute on Atlanta really didn't give him a chance to shine. He joined the league in 2020 on that raid team, and he had a lot of hype, honestly, coming from his contender days. But he ended up being a rotational piece on a mediocre team, so he didn't get a lot of chances to grow. He did remain on the team in 2021, where the Atlanta raid would elevate to a top-tier competitor. However, Edison was mostly a backup player, and he really wouldn't play all that much. That being said, when he did play quite well, notably having a really good Reaper and Tracer, but he wasn't Pelican. Having to compete with the Rookie of the Year is a tall order, and he found himself benched for a majority of the season. He did play full-time when Pelican was unable to later in this year, but the Atlanta Raid had a much worse performance with him in. Despite the Raid's incredible lower bracket run in the 2021 playoffs, Edison sat on the bench during it, and he'd end up leaving the team at the end of the year. In 2022, he would move over to the Dallas Fuel, which surprised a lot of people, myself included. People wish that the Fuel had gotten a more proven player to round out their DPS lineup, but Edison ended up proving he was pretty good, pretty quick. In 2022, Sojourn was released, and Edison was just really good at her. The Fuel had some really solid placements in the first half of the year, getting second in the kickoff clash, but in the summer showdown during the Jotes meta, Hanbin Striker Queen, Sparkles Genji, and Anakin Sojourn were all really good. The Fuel ended up winning the stage with ease, and moving into the playoffs, the meta did shift yet again. We ended up having a Winston, Lucio Kiri Reaper dive, with a hitscan player on Sojourn. However, in these playoffs, Edison went nuclear, having an out-of-body experience on the hitscan during those playoffs. He really was a difference maker, getting opening pick after opening pick, and if he didn't play as well as he did, the Dallas Fuel might not have won the 2022 season. Genuinely, you could take the name off of this guy's play during that playoff experience, and I would have thought that that was lip out there. Like, it was actually really good. His play in the finals specifically was fantastic, and he was a major reason why the 2022 finals was just such a good match. Sometimes, a team swap is all a player needs to finally get to show their full potential. The final player I want to go over is a player who really defines what it means to have a redemption arc. If you know anything about Overwatch League's history, you probably already know who I'm talking about. That being Fearless. Fearless ended up starting out on the 2018 Shanghai Dragons, widely renowned as one of the worst teams in not just Overwatch history, but in esports history as a whole. The team famously went 0-40 and becoming a huge joke in the community. Fearless, alongside Dia and Geggery, showed some pretty good signs of potential, but it really wasn't enough to save this disaster of a team. Fearless would end up going back to Contenders in 2019, where he would make it clear that he was Overwatch League caliber. He would surprisingly end up returning to the Shanghai Dragons for the 2020 season, where he would end up splitting his playtime with Stand 1. However, it was pretty clear that Fearless was a much better choice, and in the May Melee, the Dragons would end up beating the Seoul Dynasty in a 4-3 reverse sweep, and Fearless was given Player of the Match for his Winston play. The Dragons would end up winning the Countdown Cup and finish the season with a 27-2 record, the best in the league, but they would unfortunately fall short in the playoffs, ending up placing 3rd due to a really weird playoffs patch. In 2021, Fearless would end up moving over to the Dallas Fuel, where he would immediately win the May Melee tournament, but the team would end up getting 2nd and then 3rd in the following tournaments. The Fuel would finish 2nd overall in the regular season and 1st in the NA region. In the playoffs, they were considered a title favorite, but a really nice upset by the Atlanta Reign ended up sending them home early in 3rd place. In 2022, Fearless would end up riding the bench for most of the season, with Hanbin being the usual tank player for the Fuel, and people were beginning to wonder, is Fearless washed? However, in the playoffs, Fearless was back in, and he was able to show everybody that he really wasn't. His Winston play made a huge difference in helping the Fuel win the Overwatch League Finals, and he even won Finals MVP for that game as well. In 2023, he moved over to the Houston Outlaws, where he would place 2nd in both the Mid-Season Madness and the Overwatch League Finals, continuing to be a top-tier tank player for a 4th consecutive year. After the Overwatch League ended, Fearless retired, but he did come back to play for Zeta Division during the Esports World Cup before finally retiring yet again. Fearless went from a laughingstock on the 0-40 Dragons to one of the best tank players in Overwatch history, placing top 3 in the playoffs 4 years straight, as well as winning a championship. As a whole, each of these players played in some really rough situations to begin their careers, but they were able to weather the storm and really show their skills, becoming top-tier players in their own rights. These players' stories show that one or even several bad years don't define a player's legacy, and I wonder what other redemption arcs we might see in the future. With that said, thank you all so much for watching. If you liked this video, leave a like and subscribe for more Overwatch esports content. I really liked making this video, so if you have any ideas for similar content, leave a comment down below to let me know. Thank you all so much for watching.